Have you ever wondered what faith looked like long before temples, priests, or written myths even existed? Before humanity carved its first idol or whispered its first prayer, something ancient was already stirring in the minds of our earliest ancestors. Imagine a world where the line between survival and extinction was razor-thin, where every shadow in the savannah carried both danger and mystery. In this world, more than 1 million years ago, the first sparks of spirituality began to glow. Inside beings who did not yet have religion, but already had questions. And those questions were powerful enough to shape the birth of humanity itself. When we look back at those distant landscapes, we often imagine crude tools, primitive shelters, and small groups traveling endlessly in search of food. But behind these scenes, something deeper was unfolding. A kind of awareness was forming, fragile but unstoppable, pushing early humans to search for meaning in storms, in fire, in the movement of animals, in the silence of the night. It was the beginning of symbolic perception, the moment when the world stopped being only physical and started becoming emotional, mysterious, almost sacred. This awakening did not happen suddenly. It emerged drop by drop, carried by fear, curiosity, intuition, and the growing sense that existence itself had layers hidden beyond what the eyes could see. These early humans had no words to describe what they felt, yet their minds were already trying to interpret patterns, connections, signs. Why did lightning strike some places and not others? Why did the wind speak differently each night? Why did life end, and where did it go afterward? These questions shaped their behavior long before they formed beliefs. And as the environment pressed harder on their survival, this inner search pushed them to create the first gestures of meaning. It was subtle, almost invisible to us today, but it was the seed of everything that would come next in the long evolution of spirituality and human consciousness. Before we continue, tell me something. Have you ever felt that strange sensation that there is more to life than what you can explain? If this beginning makes sense to you, leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Like the video to support this journey, and check if you are already subscribed to the channel. Your engagement helps this exploration reach more people. Now let this feeling settle for a moment as we move deeper into the origins of our earliest sacred impressions, following the trail left by minds that were just beginning to awaken. As we move deeper into the origins of our earliest sacred impressions, we begin to see that symbolic awareness did not emerge from complex rituals or structured belief systems, but from the raw encounter between early humans and an unpredictable world. Those first hominids, standing halfway between instinct and imagination, were slowly learning to interpret reality not only through physical senses, but through internal reflections. Every rustle in the tall grass, every shift in the migrating herds, every pattern in the sky above their heads began to trigger questions that went beyond immediate survival. This was the beginning of conscious observation, the moment when perception evolved into meaning. Archaeological traces suggest that these early minds were experimenting with attention in ways no other species had done before. They paused to analyze the movement of clouds. They followed the flight of birds not only for hunting, but out of a strange fascination. And they began to notice that some stones had shapes or markings that seemed different from the rest. This shift from passive noticing to active interpretation marks one of the greatest cognitive transitions in human evolution. When a hominid picked up a stone because it looked unusual, or stared longer at a tree twisted by lightning, something profound was happening. Curiosity was evolving into contemplation. This expanding perception pushed them to see relationships between events. A drought was no longer just the absence of rain. It became a signal, a warning, a message hidden in nature. A successful hunt after a series of failures was not random luck. It felt like a reward, a sign that the world could be influenced or understood. These interpretations were fragile, incomplete, but they created the mental foundation for spiritual intuition. Before symbols were carved in stone, they were carved in the mind. The more early humans repeated this act of searching for meaning, the more their brains adapted to it. Neural pathways associated with memory, imagination, and emotional response became stronger, shaping a kind of internal storytelling that made sense of the unknown. Even without language as we know it, they began forming silent narratives, connecting the rhythm of storms to the movement of herds, the cycle of day and night to their own survival, and the strange power of fire to the mysteries of life itself. In this growing web of interpretations, the natural world transformed into something layered, intentional, and filled with invisible forces. The ground they walked on, the animals they observed, the sky they feared and admired, all became part of an expanding symbolic universe that guided decisions and awakened a deeper awareness. And as these interpretations accumulated, something even more remarkable began to emerge, shaping the emotional and cognitive landscape of early humanity, preparing them for the next leap in spiritual consciousness. A shift deeply tied to something that shaped the rhythm of their days and the tension of their nights. Fear. Not the sharp, immediate fear of a predator's roar, but a quieter, lingering fear that arose from the unpredictability of the world itself. Storms appeared without warning, rivers overflowed or dried up, fire erupted from lightning, and illness struck without explanation. Early humans lived in constant negotiation with forces far larger than themselves, and this relationship with uncertainty became one of the strongest engines behind the birth of early spiritual thought. For these ancient beings, fear was not simply a reaction, it became a teacher. When thunder cracked across the sky, they felt a tremor that went beyond instinct, something like awe mixed with confusion. When wind howled through the night, bending trees and scattering embers from their fires, they sensed a presence, as if the world was speaking in a language they could almost, but not quite, understand. This tension between terror and fascination created an emotional space where spiritual perception could grow. Their minds searched for meaning because meaning offered a form of control, even if only symbolic. Over time, these experiences began to form recognizable patterns in their thoughts. If a hunt failed repeatedly, they wondered if the earth was displeased. If a storm destroyed their shelter, they interpreted it not just as misfortune, but as a sign. And when fear coincided with survival, a sudden shift in wind helping them escape a predator, or a break in the storm allowing them to travel, they began to associate natural events with intention. This subtle shift, from seeing nature as random to seeing it as responsive, laid the groundwork for proto-beliefs that would echo across countless generations. Fear also amplified their sensitivity to the environment, sharpening their perception of subtle cues. They read the direction of clouds, the unusual silence before a storm, the trembling of distant ground, and even the behavior of animals, trying to decode the invisible forces shaping their world. This hyper-awareness was not just survival instinct, it became a ritual of observation, a way of interacting with reality that blurred the line between physical danger and spiritual meaning. And as they repeated this cycle of fear, interpretation and understanding, their emotional connection with the natural world deepened. The landscape was no longer just a backdrop for survival. It became a stage where unseen forces moved, reacted, and influenced their fate. Each flash of lightning, each shift in the wind, each echo in a cave carried a weight that shaped their inner stories. And within these emerging stories, the first spiritual gestures began to take form. driven by the desire to respond to these forces, to make sense of them, or perhaps to influence them ever so slightly. Driven by the desire to respond to these forces, to make sense of them, or perhaps to influence them ever so slightly, early humans began to repeat certain actions instinctively. At first, these gestures were simple, almost accidental. A stone placed carefully on another after a successful hunt. A branch arranged near the entrance of a shelter during a storm. A handful of earth sprinkled over a fallen companion. These small behaviors were not yet rituals in the way we understand them today, but they were the first attempts to create meaning through deliberate action. In those gestures lived the earliest seeds of sacred intent. As time passed, repetition gave these actions weight. The mind began to associate protection with certain shapes, comfort with certain movements, and reassurance with specific patterns. If placing a stone or drawing a line in the dirt seemed to bring a moment of order to chaos, the gesture was remembered, passed on, and performed again. Slowly, these actions transformed into shared practices, forming the earliest versions of ritual behavior. They provided something that early humans desperately needed in a world filled with unpredictability. A sense of participation, however symbolic, in the rhythm of natural forces. These early rituals also created moments of unity within a group. When a sudden storm forced them into a cave, drawing shapes on the walls or arranging objects in a specific pattern might have helped calm collective fear. When the group gathered around a fallen member, touching the body or leaving objects on the ground transformed grief into connection. Even without language, these shared actions communicated something profound. That each individual was part of something larger, a collective story unfolding across the landscape of survival. Through these practices, early humans began to encode memory into movement. The gesture became a message. Each repeated action shaped the emotional atmosphere of the group, reinforcing trust, belonging, and shared identity. These rituals also helped them navigate moments of transition, birth, danger, death, change of seasons, marking them as meaningful events rather than simple occurrences. And as rituals grew more defined, they started to blur the boundaries between the physical world and an emerging symbolic one, deepening the connection between inner experience and outer reality. In these small acts, something extraordinary was taking shape. The invisible became acknowledged, the uncertain became approachable, and the unknown became a space where meaning could be created rather than feared. And exactly within this fragile and powerful space, the next step in human spiritual evolution was waiting to unfold, shaped by objects, marks, and impressions that carried more significance than their simple forms suggested. Before we move on, I would like to hear from you. Which of these early gestures resonates with you the most, and why? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective helps expand this exploration and brings new light to this ancient journey. Shaped by objects, marks, and impressions that carried more significance than their simple forms suggested, the earliest humans began to see the world not only as a space of movement, danger, and opportunity, but as a canvas filled with signs. A stone was no longer just a stone when its symmetry stood out among irregular shapes. A bone was no longer just a remnant of a hunt when its curve resembled something familiar or mysterious. These objects sparked curiosity, and curiosity sparked attention. Through this attention, meaning began to crystallize in ways that would echo throughout human evolution. In many landscapes where early hominids lived, certain stones contained natural patterns, lines shaped by erosion, or colors that contrasted with their surroundings. When one of these objects was picked up, examined, and kept instead of discarded, a threshold was crossed. The object had become more than useful, it had become meaningful. This attachment to symbolic objects marked a fundamental shift in cognition. It hinted at an inner world expanding alongside the physical one, a world that needed symbols to express what language could not yet say. As these early humans interacted with their environment, they began to leave their own marks as well. Fingers dragging across dirt or mud created lines that felt deliberate. Scratches on cave walls, even if initially accidental, awakened a strange awareness. The realization that they could alter the world and create something that endured beyond the moment. When a shape was repeated, or a mark was traced again with greater intention, this became the earliest form of visual communication. These were not drawings as we understand them, but they were the roots of symbolic expression. Alongside marks, objects resembling shapes of importance. Curved stones that felt like tools, elongated bones that fit in the hand, or pieces of ochre that stained the fingers, became part of a growing symbolic toolkit. Their value came not from their utility, but from their ability to evoke a feeling, a memory, or a connection. These objects traveled with groups, were handed down or left in specific places, as if storing a piece of meaning that words could not yet hold. Each item served as both memory and mystery. Through these symbols, early humans found a way to externalize thoughts that had no language. They could share a moment of awe, fear, gratitude, or sorrow simply by touching or arranging an object that held shared significance. Whether placed near a shelter entrance, carried during migration, or offered near a lifeless body, these objects acted as silent messages across time and among individuals. And with each gesture, the symbolic world grew richer, preparing the human mind for an even deeper transformation, one sparked by a force that would soon reshape their nights, their gatherings, and the very essence of their spiritual imagination. One sparked by a force that would soon reshape their nights, their gatherings, and the very essence of their spiritual imagination. When early humans first encountered fire, it was not as a tool, but as a phenomenon beyond comprehension. Lightning ignited dry grass, volcanic heat cracked the earth, and flames moved with a life of their own, consuming everything in their path. At first, fire was pure terror, a force that no gesture or symbol could influence. Yet the moment they dared to approach it, to observe it rather than flee, everything began to change. Fire became the first great teacher of duality. It brought destruction, but it also brought warmth. It threatened life but protected it as well. It illuminated the darkness while revealing the hidden shapes that night always concealed. The glow of fire allowed early humans to extend their days, transforming evenings from moments of fear into moments of gathering. Around those flickering flames, something extraordinary unfolded. Minds became more alert, more reflective, more capable of imagining possibilities that daytime survival had not allowed. The fire's movement captured attention in ways no other natural force could. Its dance was unpredictable but rhythmic, wild but mesmerizing. As groups sat around it, patterns formed not only in the flames but in their thoughts. They watched embers rise like sparks of meaning, fragments of light, vanishing into the dark sky. They listened to the crackling of wood, a sound that seemed both alive and communicative. These sensory experiences slowed the pace of survival and opened mental space for contemplation, storytelling, and shared emotion. This new environment created moments of inner exploration. With danger pushed back beyond the circle of light, their minds wandered toward questions they could not ask aloud, but felt deeply. Why did fire respond to touch? Why did it consume objects and transform them? Why did it warm without being alive? These mysteries stirred a sense of sacred presence. The fire became a boundary between the known and the unknown, both a practical resource and a symbol of something greater. Over time, fire influenced not only their senses but their rituals. They placed objects near it, tossed certain materials into it, or sat silently watching as it shaped shadows on cave walls. These shadows, twisting and stretching, awakened imagination and gave form to thoughts that had no language. Fire became an emotional anchor, a source of comfort, inspiration, and symbolic power. It allowed early humans to create shared experiences that deepened their connection to one another. As the flames continued to shape their nights, this luminous force began weaving itself into their emerging spirituality. It changed how they perceived danger, how they interpreted signs, and how they formed the earliest versions of meaning. And as these gatherings grew warmer and more reflective, another profound transformation was approaching, one tied not to survival or curiosity alone, but to the most mysterious and universal experience any human group would ever face. One tied not to survival or curiosity alone, but to the most mysterious and universal experience any human group would ever face: death. Long before religion existed, death was already shaping the emotional landscape of early humanity. It was the moment when the familiar became unreachable, when a warm body turned still, when a presence vanished without explanation. Nothing in their world produced such a profound rupture, and it was this rupture that awakened some of the earliest spiritual intuitions known to our species. When a member of the group died, early humans did not simply walk away. Something in them hesitated. They lingered, touched the body, circled around it, and sometimes brought objects to place nearby. These actions were not born from logic, but from emotion. A deep, instinctive sense that something meaningful had happened, something that reached beyond the physical. The absence of movement, the silence that followed, the weight of finality, all of it pushed their minds to search for a way to understand what could not be seen or reversed. This search gave rise to behaviors that were neither practical nor necessary for survival, yet repeated across generations. Bodies were covered with leaves or stones. Certain objects were arranged near them, as if to accompany the one who no longer breathed. Sometimes, traces of red pigment were sprinkled nearby, the same pigment that years later would be used in symbolic art. These gestures may have been simple, but they held an emotional depth that marked a turning point in human consciousness. The idea that life did not simply end, that something continued, that the unseen mattered. The reactions of the group revealed a new kind of awareness. Some individuals stayed close to the body, unwilling to leave. Others made sounds of distress or pressed their hands against their own chest, as if trying to feel the living beating heart that the other had lost. These responses showed that early humans recognized the difference between presence and absence, between breath and stillness, between being here and being gone. That recognition became the seed of the first spiritual question ever asked by humanity. What happens after this moment? As groups encountered death more often, through illness, injuries, predators, or age, the rituals surrounding it grew more intentional. Placing objects, touching the body, covering it with earth or stones, all became ways of expressing what words could not: grief, confusion, affection, fear, hope. And within these gestures emerged a subtle but powerful belief that the dead still mattered, that their essence or memory lingered, that death was not an end, but a transformation. These early responses shaped the emotional bonds within the group and created a shared sense of continuity. Death did not erase belonging, it deepened it. And in this emotional depth lay the roots of later spiritual beliefs, rituals, and myths that would flourish thousands of years into the future. Before we continue, I would love to hear from you. What do you think drove these early humans to treat death with such meaning? Share your thoughts in the comments and add your perspective to this journey. As these early responses shaped emotional bonds and created a sense of continuity, something else was unfolding alongside grief: the transmission of meaning. Even without language as we know it, early humans found ways to share experiences, impressions, and symbolic gestures across generations. One gesture repeated in front of a child, one object placed deliberately during a moment of fear, one pattern drawn in the earth at night. These small actions became carriers of memory, and as memory passed from one individual to another, it began forming the earliest threads of spiritual tradition. When a group gathered near a shelter or around the fire, younger members watched closely. They observed how elders reacted to storms, how they approached the body of a fallen companion, how they placed stones, or how they traced lines in the ground. These actions were not explained, they were absorbed. Imitation became the first form of teaching. In repeating what they had seen, the young preserved the emotional meanings that those gestures held, even if they did not fully understand them. Through this silent passing of behavior, early humans created continuity between past and future. Over time, repetition shaped identity. Groups developed distinct ways of reacting to natural forces or significant events. In one region, a certain type of stone arrangement might mark respect. In another, a different object might symbolize memory or safety. These patterns emerged not from deliberate invention, but from the natural way in which humans embed meaning in shared experience. Each gesture, once repeated, gained weight, and once it held weight, it became tradition. Tradition in these early stages was not rigid or formal. It flowed like water, adapting to the environment, the landscape, and the experiences of each group. But its purpose was powerful. It allowed early humans to navigate uncertainty with a sense of coherence. When a storm approached, they performed familiar actions that gave comfort. When someone died, they repeated gestures that eased the emotional rupture. When they encountered something strange or beautiful, they responded with movements or marks inherited from those who came before them. These repeated gestures also played a key role in shaping social cohesion. Shared actions created shared identity. They made individuals feel connected not only to one another, but also to those who had lived before them. The past began to influence the present, and the present became a message to the future. Even in the absence of spoken explanations, these traditions carried emotional wisdom, guiding behavior and strengthening the sense of belonging. As the symbolic world expanded through these practices, the line between memory, meaning, and spirituality grew increasingly thin. Traditions were no longer just responses to the environment. They became bridges between generations, linking hearts through time and weaving together the earliest fabric of collective belief. And as these behaviors spread and evolved, they set the stage for something even more extraordinary: the union between cooperation and spiritual awareness that would soon redefine the path of humanity. Because as traditions spread and evolved, cooperation began to intertwine with spirituality in ways that shaped the very foundation of human groups. Early humans were not the strongest predators, nor the fastest runners, nor the most resilient animals in isolation. Their true strength came from unity. But unity was fragile without shared meanings, shared emotions, and shared responses to the unknown. Spiritual awareness became one of the invisible threads that held their groups together, strengthening cooperation and creating trust where mere instinct would not have been enough. When individuals faced the vast unpredictability of the natural world, they found reassurance not only in rituals or symbols, but in the presence of others who understood and repeated those same gestures. A mark on a stone meant more when many recognized it. A gesture near a body carried deeper significance when others echoed it. Even fear transformed when shared around the fire, shifting from isolating terror into a collective experience that bonded them more tightly. In this shared emotional landscape, cooperation grew stronger. fueled by a sense of belonging rooted in emerging spiritual meaning. This connection was not abstract. It shaped daily survival. A group that trusted one another was more coordinated during hunts, more attentive when danger threatened, more willing to share food, tools, or knowledge. Cooperation increased life expectancy, protected vulnerable members, and improved resilience against predators or harsh climates. Spiritual gestures, symbols, and early beliefs helped maintain this unity. They reminded individuals that they were part of something larger than themselves, an emerging identity that existed within the group and beyond it. Even simple actions like gathering around the fire or leaving objects in meaningful places reinforced bonds. These gestures created emotional anchors, moments when individuals felt grounded, connected, and reassured. Over time, these shared experiences became essential to group cohesion. The presence of symbolic meaning encouraged empathy, because individuals began recognizing the emotional states of others and responding to them. The same gesture that soothed fear also soothed grief. The same symbol that marked danger also marked belonging. This growing emotional intelligence changed how early humans interacted. Cooperation was no longer only about survival, but about shared inner experience. The group became a source of identity, comfort, and continuity. The emerging spiritual dimension encouraged individuals to think beyond immediate needs, to consider the impact of actions on others, to participate in rituals that held collective value. It encouraged the formation of bonds that persisted even in hardship. As these shared practices deepened, early humans began to perceive themselves differently, not just as individuals navigating the world, but as members of a collective shaped by meaning, memory, and mystery. Cooperation and spirituality became inseparable, each reinforcing the other in ways that molded the structure of human society. And within this evolving harmony, another transformation was waiting to rise, one that would connect the earliest symbols and emotions to the vast tapestry of belief, systems that would someday define entire civilizations. And within this evolving harmony, another transformation was waiting to rise, one that would link those early gestures, fears, rituals, and shared emotions to something far greater than any single moment. As groups continued to navigate their world, the symbolic objects they carried, the marks they traced, and the rituals they repeated began forming a silent archive of meaning. Over countless generations, these fragments of early spirituality hardened into something more structured, more recognizable, more enduring. The first seeds of what humanity would one day call faith. These earliest symbols did not resemble later religious icons. They were simple, humble, shaped by hands still learning the weight of intention. A stone chosen for its unusual color, a bone arranged near a sleeping area, a pattern drawn beside a fire, yet each held significance far beyond its physical form. They were anchors for emotion, memory, and identity. They allowed early humans to store meaning outside the mind, turning the external world into a companion in their search for understanding. And as these symbols multiplied, their influence expanded. They guided behavior, shaped expectations, and offered comfort when uncertainty grew heavy. A symbol placed during a hunt might reassure the group. Another arranged near a shelter might signal safety. These actions formed a bridge between experience and imagination, allowing early humans to create a shared narrative about the forces guiding their lives. With every gesture, they strengthened the idea that something unseen moved through their world, a presence woven into storms, fire, life, and death. Over time, these symbols became part of collective memory. They linked generations, allowing emotions and interpretations to survive long after the individuals who created them were gone. As traditions solidified, the symbolic world grew more complex, more capable of holding mysteries that no single mind could fully grasp. Spirituality was no longer a response to fear or curiosity. It had become a framework for understanding existence itself. And yet its origin remained rooted in something deeply human: the need to connect, to make sense of experience, to honor those who came before, and to search for meaning beyond the visible. These ancient symbols, created by hands that lived nearly 1.9 million years ago, were not just artifacts of survival. They were the first attempts to express wonder, the earliest reflections of a mind awakening to itself, the beginning of humanity's long journey into the sacred. If you stayed with me until this final moment, let me know by leaving a comment saying something like, "I am here until the end," or "This message reached me." Your presence helps this exploration grow, and if this journey added something valuable to your day, consider subscribing to the channel so you can continue exploring these stories with me. A like also helps this content reach more people who are curious about our origins. And if you want to keep going, there is another video waiting right beside this one, expanding the path we opened here. Just click and come with me as we continue exploring the ancient roots of what makes us human.